Hello, and thanks for joining this webinar. I'm Shannon, an agricultural economist with the Center for Ag Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We typically host these webinars every Thursday at noon Central Time, and you can always find an updated schedule, registrations, and an archive of all of our past webinars on our website at cap.unl.edu. Using the right efficiency ratios can be critical in assessing the sustainability of productivity and profitability of irrigation and nitrogen resources. This webinar will look at different efficiency metrics to help you understand them and how to apply them over time to make progress on your business goals and objectives. Joining me today to present is Dr. Matt Stockton, a professor of agricultural economics at UNL. And as they come up, if you guys have questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A panel or the chat in your Zoom window, and we will answer them at the end. All right,
Okay.
Matt, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. The
Hey.
only thing I would say before we start is
Yes, sir.
these measures are important because you have a way to gauge, or it's kind of a form of when you compare yourself in your progress, you can measure your progress, and a ratio or these measures are helpful for that. And that's how they can help you become better at production and also better at making your
Yeah.
business successful.
Yeah, it's an indicator that you can use to like help benchmark things over time is kind of how I look at it. And again, depending on what you're interested in, could be different things, right?
And they don't need to be complicated. That's
No.
one of the things that we're going to stress today.
Yes, exactly. All
Because
right.
before that, you go
Yes,
to the
sir.
bank and they go, they got what that Sweet 16, and they got all these ratios and
It's
all your
21 now, but yeah.
yeah, or whatever. Okay, sorry, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
It just sounds
And
better when you say sweet 16 than the fact that there's
yeah, never
21.
been kissed or whatever. So the point being is that, having metrics to measure things is great, but you need to have metrics that you understand and that you agree with and that you recognize with. And
Mhm.
that's what today's presentation is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when it comes to irrigation and nitrogen fertilization, there's different philosophies, right,
Yes.
Shannon?
Yes. Yes.
So you want to talk about this first philosophy?
So the first philosophy is, and this is just some people's philosophy, I don't want to say it's mine. So is that you should never
Oh,
allow any nitrogen to escape the root zone, right? So it shouldn't go anywhere else other than just uptake in that plant. So,
and along with water too, because it's
and
irrigation,
water.
right?
Yeah,
So
sorry.
in other words, no waste. They want a complete
Yeah,
100% complete system. Now
right.
that's fine if if that is your goal, then you need a measure that
Yeah,
reflects that goal, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. So,
So the next one we talk about is, and these are just examples. You could make a measure or efficiency measure for almost anything.
anything.
I mean,
Yeah.
efficiency measure, it's not like all these, there's special efficiency measures and you have to use a certain one and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
But there are some that are a lot more useful than others. And that's part of the discussion that we're going to talk about today. So
Yeah.
the ratio of response to application, in other words, so I put on X and I get Y in response.
Yeah.
That can be put into a ratio. That's kind of what the WNIPI ratios we're going to talk about here a little later
Yeah.
is about. The next one
We're
is the economic returns. So in other words, all
Mhm.
of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute, we got the first one is kind of biological. I put
Right.
on fertilizer, I put on water. How much yield do I get back? So
Yeah.
what's that ratio? It's
Right.
like, so some people actually use this kind of like this ratio in the actual application of farming. They go, oh well, let's see, I need to put a half a pound of fertilizer on per acre for every 1 bushel or whatever.
Mm.
A rule of thumb type thing, and
Mhm.
that's actually a measure or a ratio, and it can use as an efficiency ratio if you wanted to, and you could actually calculate it an average, or you could do it at certain points in the field, whatever.
Mhm.
Okay, so the next one is the economics return for the applications made, and now this one
Yeah.
becomes a little more applicable to, okay, so how much do I spend?
Actually, yeah.
Go ahead, you say it.
No, 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 I was gonna say it's how much again, I mean, obtaining the most return is just that, right? It's like, how much do I spend? How much am I making? And what is the difference between those two, right? So
That's the last one.
it's a
That's
very
exactly.
simplified version of what it is, but yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and actually we're going to use one of that ratio as we're going to call it a
yeah.
DRIN, and we'll
Yes.
explain that in a minute. But then the one above it is the economic return based on it's a ratio of what you get in from money wise. So in other words, it's dollar efficiency. In other
Yeah.
words, the one above it is one of the ratios is you could have a ratio that's purely production oriented, and then you could have another ratio that's totally just how much money I spent to how much I got back.
Yep.
And it's a ratio of that. And we're going to talk about those and why the advantages of each of those, why they're important
Yep.
and why you may want to look at them or why you may just, they're not worth looking at. Go ahead, Shannon.
True. Okay. So how many, I love this one because Matt and I had this discussion earlier, today and yesterday, but it's just how many measures of I and N do you think are out there? I mean, I don't want to say it's limitless, but there's a lot. I was like, you can Google it and put in, like, you get all kinds of numbers. You'll get all kinds of different ratios and things to look at. And I don't know, if you're me, eventually you'll get cross-eyed a little bit. So
And I think
yeah,
that's the point. That's the point.
yeah,
And that's actually one of the points that we wanted to make and add this when we did this presentation
yes,
was we want people to understand that, look, you don't need 100,000
no,
ratios or measures. What you need is you need one you
that
understand
works for you.
and that can work over time to help you
Mhm.
become a better person as far as managing or whatever your goals are, because everybody
Yeah,
has different goals. I mean, if your goal is to
absolutely.
become purely water efficient and you
Right.
don't care about cost and you don't
You're
care
going to look at
about
something completely
bleed
different than
different.
someone else who's really concerned about economic efficiencies and, what their returns are. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Matt.
No, you're good. So the thing that's important is you want you want to measure that you understand and that can help you measure over time whether you're making progress and tell you how you're doing as far
Mhm.
as your production management or all your total management, systems wide management, which would include
Yeah.
the economics and all the things that are associated with it.
Mhm.
So there are some other possible measures. You got your physical
Yes.
outcomes we just talked about. You also
Hmm.
have institutions. No, that's not a mental place that they send people. Okay, which is what I thought when I first thought of institutional when I was in
Yeah.
school.
It's
It's
government.
yeah, it's basically
Government.
laws
Yeah.
and regulations and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. That's institutional. Yes,
Right.
I know. It sounds kind of bad, but it's not so
It's
bad.
not. Yeah.
Really. And they have,
Yeah.
in other words, if you're measuring, I mean, like, for example, the government may say you need to do certain things. You might
Hmm.
develop a ratio to see how effectively you're doing it, or they might require you to have a certain measure of that. And this would be one
Right.
way you could accomplish that is by building a ratio type thing. Measure
Absolutely.
economic outcomes. And I think that this is important. The thing that needs to be recognized is that many times your economic indicators also include the biological part
Aspect. Yeah.
because productivity is biological, but
Yes.
what it costs you to get that productivity is economic. And I think by combining both of them together, along
Yeah.
with combining the value of the crop that you get or the yields or whatever you're going to sell is important. And so I think economic measures are a lot more understandable in some respects if they're simply done.
Yeah.
And that's what
So,
you have. So go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead.
Which of these is likely to be the most beneficial to your? That's a question for you
I
to
was going to say,
answer.
I just want to give the economist answer.
Okay,
It
give the
depends.
economist answers. Spit it out, Shannon. Spit
It
it out.
depends.
It depends. Yeah, I know it's kind of frustrating. Somebody asks you a
Yeah.
question and you get back. It depends. Well, of course it depends.
Mhm.
Everybody knows it depends. But yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. All right, let's go
Yeah,
to the
well, I
next.
mean, different people are focused on different things with regards to their businesses, right? Some are super, like you said, focused on, water efficiency or production or, nitrogen use.
And
So,
they should be because they
oh
have
yeah,
different goals and objectives. They're a different place in
absolutely.
their life. They have different things. Like some people want to, they're really, really super concerned about nitrates in the water. Well, you
Yeah.
may want to be one way or another. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
different ways of looking at it.
Absolutely.
Go ahead. Let's go
Okay.
forward.
Okay. So we have an upcoming Cornhusker economics article. I think it comes out next week, if we recall correctly. Uh,
It does.
Yes, that discusses irrigation and nitrogen application efficiency. So if you're interested in checking that out, it'll be available, I think, a week from yesterday. But yeah,
Right. And I'm also working on a much longer article that
more in
only
depth.
those that are
Hmm.
brave and want to read a lot and technical stuff and understand, which, not
Mhm.
everybody, that's not everybody's forte. But we're going to have one of those too, but that will be coming out later.
Yeah. That's why these webinars are nice. I think it's a good visual to discuss. So,
Use efficiency. This is, we're going to talk about okay, now, I don't know if any of you have heard of the TAPS program, but the University of Nebraska is the creator and original TAPS organization. We're the ones that started it. I happen to be one of the founding fathers, if you want to put it that way, which makes me sound old, doesn't it? So maybe I should say founding members would be a
yeah.
better way to say it. But anyway, one of the measures that it came up with, and Darren Rudnick and he's a water engineer and he worked for university at that time. He came up with this index, what do you call an index, which is basically a
Mhm.
measure or ratio or whatever. And this is called the WNIPI, which is the Water Nitrogen Intensification Performance Index, which is a
Mhm.
mouthful, by the way. So WNIPI is easier to say. So WNIPI, and also it sounds cool to say WNIPI. I mean, if you say it just right, hey, what's your WNIPI today? It sounds a lot more cool than just, what's
Yeah.
your water nitrogen intensification performance index? You know what I'm saying? So it's easier.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at this equation a little bit. I know math is not everybody's favorite thing to do, but
Right.
basically it's a ratio of percentages. On the top, which is the numerator, if you want to get technical,
Right.
it's the difference in yield divided by the yield. So YO basically is the yield without putting any fertilizer or nitrogen added to the field. It doesn't
Yes.
mean there's no nitrogen or water there because you have rainfall and you have things you don't control. And then you have
Hmm.
the residue and you have all these things that would provide nitrogen throughout the year. So there is some nitrogen there and there's some of that. So if you have to have a control plot where you grow this. And so
So you know what that is.
you know
Hmm.
what the Y0 is. So in other words, you just plant the corn next to your other corn, but you don't fertilize it, you don't water it, and you put it in there. And then you have the YA, which is it when after I added the fertilizer and after I added the water, this
Hmm.
is the yield I got. So that's the top. The
Yeah.
bottom is a lot simpler. Basically, it's the amount of rainfall or water available to the plant during the growing season. And then you add the amount you irrigated. And this would be like an acre
Yep.
inches, would be a typical way to measure this per acre. Okay. And then your next one is the nitrogen. You have the nitrogen and you add that. And then you multiply those two percentages together, which would be obviously greater than one, both of them. And you come up with some number, which is going to be larger than a small one, which is in the numerator. And so you're going to get a number probably less than one, and
Hmm.
you're going to get a measure of efficiency. And so
Yes.
that's how we used it in the TAPS teams to rank them as far as the most efficient. And then we give an award for the team that has the most efficient use of nitrogen. So in other words, the one with the greatest number. Now we just get rid of the
Hmm.
negative sign, so it's not a big deal. So
Okay.
just don't get into that. All right. So
Yes.
that's the WNIPI, and it's a purely biological production oriented. Doesn't care about the cost of fertilizer. Doesn't
Yeah.
care
It
about
doesn't, it's unitless. So,
yes.
yeah.
That's another way of saying it. It's a science. When you talk about unitless, that sounds like you neutered your cat. But whatever. The point being is, it's unitless in the sense that it's
Yes.
generalizable.
Yeah. However, it doesn't really answer questions as far as like actual business. Look, I'm an economist. I do a lot with, and specifically, I do a lot with like financial record keeping and business planning and strategic planning. So this is fabulous to, again, look at those biological efficiencies. But as an economist, does this tell me anything?
The other thing too is like,
Yeah.
let's say so you go up to some other farmer and say, "Hey, I had a WNIPI of 0.7,"
Well, mine
and
was
they're
one or
yeah,
six
yeah,
point six,
but
0.8.
then
Yeah.
what does that mean? Okay, it means that you have a number, and if somebody has a higher number, they have a more efficient use of it. If somebody has a
Yeah.
lower number, but it doesn't really tell you how much nitrogen and how much, and it doesn't tell you a lot about. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
give you as much valuable information as I'd like to see it give us. Let's
Okay.
go to the next one.
Got it. Okay.
You want to do this one?
Well, I can talk a little bit about it, yeah. So this is the I don't know how we want to call it. We're going to call it DRIN. It's a drink without a K. So basically it's looking at dollar efficiency in terms of the dollar spent on irrigation and nitrogen. So basically again, similar to the last equation, we use very similar, like the variables are all pretty much the same thing. So it's the yield from the added irrigation and the added nitrogen minus that zero plot, which was the one that just had the natural rainfall and whatever naturally occurring nitrogen is in there, times that dollar per bushel that they received. And then that's divided by, again, that added irrigation, now I have to word, irrigation acres, inches across acres.
Inch of water.
Thank you so much. This is why you're here. I was
Okay, okay.
plus the added nitrogen and the cost of that. So
There you go.
yeah, it's a mouthful.
So, all right. So, and so, what? In other words, look, if you go up to somebody and say, for every dollar
I
I
spend
spent on fertilizer and every dollar I spent on water
water.
together,
How much am I
how
getting?
much did I get in return? So, in other
Right.
words, if this number is less than 1,
We have a lot of,
you have a problem.
Yeah.
Because that means you
Spent
spent more than you got back. When it exceeds 1, like in other words, let's say it's $3. That means
Yeah.
for every dollar you spent in nitrogen and water, you got back
Mhm.
$3. Now, the reason we're going to tell you this and how you might want to apply this is you don't have that YO, but you can estimate what that might have been and use that number as long as you're
Yeah.
consistent, and that will give you a ratio of how much you get back from what you spent. You could
Yeah.
in other words, how much more yields did you get back for the stuff that you put on? So that if you look at your farm and you say, okay, if I didn't put any on, what would my yield be? Well, I think it'd be about this. And you should have a pretty good idea what that's going to be
Yeah.
because you farm it a lot. And so that what you'd substitute in for YO. So you could actually use this ratio and say, okay, here's what I got from all my fertilization this year and all my stuff. This is how much I paid for it to put in the denominator for that on a per acre basis. And then I subtract from the top, I subtract what I got minus what I thought I would get without fertilizer. And then that would give you that ratio. And you can be
Mhm.
consistently and copy that. So you can actually apply it on your own fields.
Yep.
Okay. Next one.
Okay. Okay. So this is the economic return efficiency, or the NRIN, mostly because I can't say NRIN. It just sounds weird when it comes out of my mouth. So
NRIN.
yeah,
Yes,
but this is looking
NRIN,
at a net
whatever.
return to irrigation and nitrogen application. So it's basically looking at, again, what our yields are with our added irrigation, or I'm just going to say water, it's easier for me, with our added water and nitrogen, minus, again, that Y0. So that plot right next to it that we didn't do anything to, it just whatever it's got and whatever rainfall it gets, that's what it gets, times that dollars per bushel, minus the, again, added irrigation or added water inches, and the cost of that, plus the cost of the nitrogen, and then that's in a bracket, so you do that first.
Right. So in other words, what we're saying is we take our total cost of putting nitrogen and water on, the extra water. So in other words, the
Yeah.
added irrigation or
Yeah.
added water, if you want to call it, I don't care what you call it, the cost of that, which may include the pumping cost, and it may include, depreciation on the unit that you use and all that, whatever you got in there.
Yep.
And so, yeah, and that would be something you would, maybe you'd have to estimate too, but whatever. So
Most
you
people
have
have a
the,
pretty solid idea of what they're
oh,
spending
I'm
on a
sure
lot
that
of
they
these,
do.
but
I'm
yeah.
sure they do. But I'm just saying, so you get the cost of water per, inch, the number of
Mhm.
inches you applied, you multiply that together. You take the amount of nitrogen you applied, you multiply by that the cost of applying it, the cost of the
Mhm.
fertilizer, the equipment, whatever else it took to get it there. And then you say, okay, so and this is how much yield I have as a result of the fertilizer, not my total yield, but the result of my
Mhm.
fertilizer. So you could say, okay, so if without putting fertilizer on, I think I would have got this much, 130 bushels, and yet with the fertilizer, I got 260. So that would be like maybe 130 bushels,
Yeah.
under that circumstance. So
Yeah.
then you take that, and what this simply says is, what did I gain totally from doing that? In other words, what was my physical outcome? So in other words, and we're going to show some ratios here next is what we're going to do, and
Mhm.
show you how they compare and stack up against each other, so
Yeah.
that you can see that how you measure something is really important depending
Yes.
on what goals you have.
Exactly. You ready for the next one?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So This is the top 8 farms looking at the WNIPI
Yeah,
from
this is from
2024.
2024. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and this is the sprinkler corn contest, right? So
Here in
with
North
taps,
Platte.
there are a lot of different contests that are going throughout that Matt can tell you more about if you have a lot of questions about those. So, but you can see the WNIPI is on the far right over here. So that's again just that percentage change, right? So, number one, the
It's a
number one
percentage of
rank.
a percentage times a
Yes.
percentage, divided by a percentage. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, what is that? It's hard to, there's so many things going on there that it's difficult to basically, it's just
Yes.
a number you come up with that measures if you were more efficient than the next guy.
Yes. So that's the WNIPI. But the really fun thing is, again, depending on your operation, depending on what you're wanting to do and what your goals are as a business person, right? You can look at something like the DRIN, or where you're looking at, what did I spend versus what did I gain? So, right? So let's just use the first ranked person here, or team, I should say, their teams. Sorry. Every dollar they spent, they got how much back, Matt?
$2.55, which
Right.
isn't bad. But yet,
No.
okay, so now here's the thing that you need to look at, which is kind of cool, right? Right,
Yeah.
Shannon? Is that
Yes.
they got the most efficient use of nitrogen and water of
Yeah.
anybody else. So the natural thought is, okay, so they made the most money.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not true. And
Right.
that's part of the point, is
Yeah.
that index only measures your actual physical output for physical input of that particular
Mm-hmm.
thing. The problem that we have is this $2.55 depends on cost
Yep.
and revenue. So what happens if I'm a guy and I go out and market my corn for 20 cents a bushel more? Well, at 20 cents a bushel more, that means I'm more efficient in gaining dollars. Now,
Yeah.
if he's so efficient in producing crops, so why doesn't he have the top thing? Well, it's not dollars in this case, because now let's go
Right.
down to number 3 here, which
Yeah,
is
that's what I was
the
looking
farm.
at
Okay,
here. Yeah.
you go
I
ahead.
don't know if you guys can see my pointer or not, Matt.
Oh, I can see it.
Okay, good.
Good job.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so tell us what's going on, Shannon.
So, number 3, again, and this is kind of, I don't know, as a nerd, this is a fun thing to look at to me, depending on the efficiency I'm looking at and depending on what my goals are as a business owner, right? Every dollar they spent, they got $2.64, right? So,
Yeah, right. So in other words, for whatever dollars they spent, they got more back.
yes. That being
So
said, I do think we need to talk about.
we are going to, this is why we're
Okay.
going to do this, but go
All right.
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I
I was like,
insist.
how much did they spend to get that $2.64? So, you
Right,
know,
right. So we got 2 columns, right? We got this.
yes.
Okay, so it says dollars per acre. That's
Yeah,
how
that's
much.
their end and run.
That's how much this column would cost under cost per acre. If you
Mhm.
look at that column, which is column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
This
column
one.
5,
Yeah.
right? So you look at that column. That's how much it cost them for their fertilizer and for their irrigation. Now look,
Right.
there's a lot of differences here. I mean, some of it doesn't seem so much. You got
Mhm.
7.6 inches, you got 8.96, and then all these different
Mhm.
amounts that they put on. And then here's the amount of fertilizer. This number 4, which is farm 6, put on
Yeah.
192 pounds of
Yeah.
nitrogen.
Yeah.
Now, so we're going to get to that in a minute. But now look at how
Okay.
efficient that for every dollar they spent, they only got $2.14. Okay, well, is that a bad deal? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because now we're going to look at something else, and that's called I mean, the WNIPI they're like ranked what, sixth or fifth or fourth or whatever it is.
Fourth.
Fourth.
Yeah. You're talking
Okay.
about farm 6, right?
Yeah, so they
Okay,
rank
yeah.
fourth. Okay, so they rank fourth. Well, that's cool. But now let's talk about overall profitability.
Yeah.
Okay, nobody had as much money per acre made as they did. Now they weren't as
Yeah.
efficient in using nitrogen and
Water.
water, but
Mhm.
they certainly made more money because the volume of what they sold and because of the prices they sold at. And so in other words, their cost was
Mhm.
a little higher because their cost was 173. Well, but yet there's somebody at $183, which is farm number 28, which is the
Mhm.
sixth ranked farm. Okay, well, they
Mhm.
got 180, they spent $183. Well, the intention is if I spent all this money, but what was their return at $183? They got a
They
dollar
had fewer
84.
bushels. Yeah.
They got $1.84.
Mm-hmm.
And they only their WNIPI was fairly low, so they weren't that efficient with that nitrogen. But here's the deal: is they made a total of $154, which is $40 less than the winning, actually $44 less per acre than the farm that had 192 pounds of nitrogen applied and
Oh, yeah.
8.96. And yet the water is somewhat similar, and these nitrogen are somewhat similar, but the efficiency, it's
Mm-hmm.
just enough less, and the
Mm-hmm.
productivity just enough more. And then the prices they sold it at, because the cost per unit is the same as far for nitrogen and water. Because remember,
Yeah.
these are all the same farm area done at the same time.
Time.
And that's what TAPS does. It keeps costs the same, so you can make
Yeah.
comparisons of productivity and some other issues. And that's what we did.
Yes.
So they made a lot more money, and
Yeah, they did.
now they're fairly efficient too. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
1.14 isn't. I mean, I don't know, 0.16 versus 1.14. I'm not sure. They are
Yeah.
efficient, but they are, most importantly, if they're looking for staying in business, they're looking at that
They're
now.
doing pretty good. Yeah.
They may not be considering some of the cost, like if, for example, on your farm, if lost fertilizer is cost, how much is lost,
Right.
wasted? If that's something you want to calculate and know, there are some equations, things you can do that from your agronomist, and you can kind of get an idea how much is not being used and put that in there, and that would give you, when you got that number, you would be accounting for that, and you would know whether that was the maximum profit based
Mm-hmm.
on all those conditions that you put into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Shannon. You got something?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. So I was like,
Oh, well,
no,
I'm
you're fine.
glad. I'm glad.
Yeah.
So if you look at this, efficiency is a
Mm-hmm.
measure you need to use. For example, if I measured this every year and I kind of knew that I was going to get, basically my base yield
Yes.
without fertilizer, you may not, know exactly what that is, but that's okay. You put a number in there, say, how much do you think? So normally I get this much off this field. This was this kind of year. I think I would have got
Mm-hmm.
this much. Now that's not a perfect measure, but that's not a bad measure. And then you can go from that route. The other, because years can vary because of the weather conditions and some other things. But then you go over
Yes.
that and they say, so how many bushels did I gain by putting on my fertilizer? How many
Right.
bushels did I
You can
gain
look
by
at
putting on
these.
my water and fertilizer together? And that's what
Mm-hmm.
the WNIPI does. And then you can look at, okay, what is my efficiency of dollar values? In other words, for the money I spent, what did
Mm-hmm.
I get back? And that's what the drink without a K is, or the
Yes.
DRIN without a K is. Sorry, it's a
Yeah, you're
drink if
fine.
it's got a K. So, and then NRIN is the other
Yes.
one, which is the one that tells you, okay, after it's all said and done, after I consider the cost of my fertilizer and cost of my water, this is how many more bushels I
Yeah.
produced by using that. And it gives you an idea that how effective that is in increasing profitability. And then
Mm-hmm.
you can compare that. And that's a number that I would definitely want to think about and estimate
Yeah.
annually to see, okay, in other words, how effective was I in using my fertilizer and in using my water? Not just how efficient made the plant grow. Because you can be really efficient at a low level of inputs and not make a lot of money because you don't have enough volume of crop on the field to pay for the
Right. To meet
fixed
your debts.
meet your debts and fixed
Yeah.
costs and your other costs. So you got to
Mm-hmm.
be careful when you're thinking about efficiency and what you're really trying to measure and what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing with these is, like you said, in my mind, is like as a benchmarking tool to see how I'm doing over time. Because once you set up the Excel sheet or the Google Sheets, you just kind of plug it in every year and you can, again, benchmark things, which is really nice to see how
Well,
you're doing.
okay, so think about it. You could sit down
Yeah.
at the end of the year. You know how much you spent on
Mm-hmm.
fertilizer. You know how much you
How much you
spent
spent?
on
Mm-hmm.
water wise. I mean, you know how long you
Absolutely.
pumped or whatever, and what it costs, and how many
Yeah.
inches approximately you put on or whatever. And you
Mm-hmm.
got that. So you got that. You get the cost of that. All right. And you can do it on a complete area if you want, and then divide it by the number of acres. So you get it down to acres
Mm-hmm.
because it's per acre that you really want to analyze it at.
Yes.
And then you take the extra yield that you think you got from adding that fertilizer. Now, the better you can estimate the actual yield, that's great. And so I suppose, I mean, if you want to be scientific like the university, and we all are, the university is, that doesn't work in real life. I get it. So, but it's good to have the university around to do these kinds of things. You can get an idea of what's going on. But
Hmm.
the point I'm making is you estimate what yield you got as a result of adding that fertilizer, and you put it in there, and that gives you an idea of how effective your dollars were and how it affected your profitability. And that's really important or your returns. And that's important to know because
Hmm.
so like in this case, let's go back to the farms. Let's take farm
Right.
number 28, which is in row 6.
Hmm.
They spent a lot of money. They spent the most at $377 per acre.
Hmm.
Okay. Or that's how much they gained in value, but they spent $183
Hmm.
and they only got back 337. Well,
That's
if
$154. Yeah.
right, but what could they have done from a management's perspective to change that? Well, if I'm looking at this from a manager's perspective, I'm going, what could I do more? Well, number
Mm.
one is, okay, that was it an effective use of fertilizer? Well, they were pretty effective. There's nothing, wrong with what they did. It's perfectly good. It's up in there in the top, 6 or 7 people that are ranked as
Yeah.
far as efficiency. Okay. But where did they go wrong? Well, their cost was 183, which is at the same, they compared to everybody else, they spent more money, which means they put more
Right.
inputs on. But if they put more inputs on, what would they have to do then if that was already done to get a higher ratio? Well, the only thing they have left for them to do is to market better.
Yeah.
So if they would have marketed for $40 more, so if they would have had a value of 300 and because the total number of bushels, is there a total bushels here somewhere? Oh,
Uh, I don't know
no,
about total
no,
bushels,
it's on
but
a
you do
different.
have bushels per acre.
Yeah, that's a
Because this one
gain.
was
This is gain.
82
Yeah, see,
versus,
82. See,
yeah.
they didn't gain as much. They used more
Yeah, they didn't
fertilizer and they
gain as
used
much
more.
compared to some of the others
Right.
that used
Now, if
less,
they had gained 100
but
bushels, let's
such as
say,
life.
that
Yeah.
would have been that would have changed that value completely. And
Yeah.
they could have been more efficient. So, in other words, how they used their fertilizer and what it cost them shows them that their fertilizer wasn't as effective enough to really get their optimal profitability.
Hmm.
Anyway, because they spent more money, but they made less, and it could be due with marketing, and it could do with the productivity response, the difference that they had. It could be due with this 82 bushels
Hmm.
or it has to do with marketing. And so those are the two things they should focus on and saying, okay, so am I getting the effective use of my nitrogen and water? Is there a better way to do it? It could be a variety thing. You could actually look
Oh
at
yeah, it could be.
it
Yeah.
also could be the fact is that
Hybrid, but yeah.
maybe you're dealing with a field that doesn't
Yeah.
have the yield potential,
Hmm.
and then you would maybe want to adapt that so that you could get more potential and profitability from it. So you have to look at all these things, but this helps do that, and that's why efficiency measures, and that's what all I have to say about them.
Good job.
I
Yeah.
hope this helps someone in their thinking. I mean, that the whole point is, what are measures are great, and it's great to have them, but if you don't use them or understand them, there's not much point in it.
Yeah. But I think again, depending on what your goals are, as a business person, is going to depend on what you're going to use. You might use all three. Again, you
Or
create that
something
Excel or
completely
Google
different.
sheet or something completely different. Exactly. Again.
But I would
So,
recommend that you use something to measure
but have something to
what you're
benchmark over
doing so that
time.
you know. In other words, if I
Yeah.
come, let's say I'm calculating this measure and I use this measure and let's go to the DRIN.
Okay.
And if my measure, like, see, this one is a 1.8. Well,
Yeah.
what if I get a 2.55? How does that affect the other ones? You got to look at this and say, in other words, what does that mean? It means that for every dollar I spent, I got lots of money back. So in
Hmm.
other words, either I got to do a better job of marketing or I need more productivity out of the fertilizer in order to increase that number of
Yeah.
efficiency. And yet there's people, like I said, we got people that 264 was the high.
Yeah.
Well, $2.64 was pretty, I mean, that's
That's,
great.
that's a good
We're at,
return. Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So think about it. This guy's almost $1 per unit different. See?
Oh,
He,
yeah.
all right. So, but how
Yeah.
much fertilizer did he put? He put on more fertilizer and he put on less water. Okay.
Hmm.
Well, that water to fertilizer ratio might have been what caused it. What if he'd put on more water? Maybe that would have been a made for decision. That's why farming is so tricky. You have to
Hmm.
understand the relationships, the productive relationships between the productivity and the inputs that you're putting on. And these
Mm-hmm.
ratios help you understand, look, I could, this one got this and I got this, and maybe I need to think about how to change that ratio in a way that would be positive, more positive, and get more for my buck, so to speak. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what that would be one way to look at it.
Yeah. Good job.
Okay, so what else we got to talk about? Is that it?
I think
Are there
that's it.
are
Does
there any
anybody have any
questions?
questions?
Any thoughts, contributions? Are you monitoring questions, or is Ryan?
I am not. I'm trying to now.
Well, if there's no questions, that's all right.
Yeah. If you have questions, you can feel free to reach out to either one of us. Um, yeah, and we've got a paper coming out next week in that Cornhuskers Economics, which goes through all the math on that. And then if you have questions on setting up your own like sheets for that, you can just give one of us a call.
It's not difficult, and like
No.
I said, those little the DRIN and the NRIN or whatever it is are really simple. They're basically, you just got to have quantities of irrigation,
Yep.
quantities of fertilizer you use, yields, and then you may have to estimate the yield difference, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And you know, basically you could go from there. The other thing you could do, and I guess I don't want to complicate it. There are other ways to do it and make a similar ratio by using just the final numbers, but
Yeah.
that would be a whole nother day, and I don't want to confuse the issue by talking about it.
Okay, we have a question, and they're asking when the recording will be live. I believe it'll be live within the next 24 hours. So,
Recording?
yes,
Okay.
this is recorded.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. So,
Good. Yeah, Ryan's really good. He'll get it out quickly.
he's amazing.
We'll just call him our producer. The producer will do a good
He
job.
kind of is. So, he
Well, he
definitely takes
is. What
care
do you
of
mean,
us.
kind of? He is the
Yeah.
producer. He's good. Okay. I don't have any else to say, so I thank you for those, and I hope anybody that can use this, it does you some good. Otherwise, don't use it. No,
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Okay.
What's the point
I
of
know
using
you are.
this?
I've met you. I'm like, yes.
It doesn't help
Yes.
you. Don't do it.
Yes.
But the thinking behind it is what's, in other words, how efficient am I using my dollars?
Yeah.
Which doesn't always make you most profitable, but then how many dollars am I getting overall by what I'm doing, which is the last one. And then there are other ways to calculate your productivity and efficiency.
Yeah. Well, like we discussed, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to eat that elephant, so to speak. So, again,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, all right. I don't see any additional questions. So, with that, we'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We look for this recording this afternoon in the archive section of our Center for Ag Profitability's webinar page, cap.unl.edu/webinars. When you exit Zoom, you should see a short survey, and we would really appreciate your quick feedback on today's webinar and ideas for other topics to cover in the future. Thank you again, and have a good afternoon.
Okay, yes, but before you go, I would like to say this. There's going to be an irrigation one we're going to be doing soon. So if you're interested in irrigation and talking more about irrigation and irrigation challenges, stay
Yes.
tuned. Bye.